Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Oppie, co-chair of this year's Feinberg Family Distinguished Lecture Series. It's an honor to welcome you to our Capstone event, The Poetry of War and Resistance, featuring 5 distinguished and award-winning poets. We are broadcasting from the campus of the University of Massachusetts Amherst, which was founded and built on the unceded homelands of the Pocumtuck Nation on the land of the Norwoteg community. We begin with that acknowledgement. The Feinberg series is presented by the UMass Amherst History Department. This year's series has explored the theme, Confronting US Imperialism. I encourage you to visit the Feinberg series website to view recordings of prior events and to access recommended readings and resources. You can find more about the series in the chat box, along with information on how to turn on live closed captioning. If you are attending this event as part of a class, you'll also want to look to the chat for a link to our sign-in sheet. Throughout tonight's event, we'll be sharing links to the published work of tonight's panelists, both in the chat and on our website. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge this year's Feinberg series co-presenter, the Ellsberg Initiative for Peace and Democracy, and the more than 36 university and community partners who have co-sponsored the series. I also thank the large team of students, faculty, and staff whose collaborative efforts brought this series to fruition, especially my colleagues Diana Sierra Becerra, Jess Johnson, Allison Russell, and Tom Kelleher. And of course, Kenneth R. Feinberg and Associates, whose generosity makes this series possible. Thanks as well to Daniel Ellsberg, whose lifelong activism inspires our work. Tonight's moderator is Ru Freeman, a Sri Lankan and American activist and internationally renowned novelist, poet, and critic. After the readings, she will lead a Q&A with our panel, guided by your questions. We will periodically drop a link to the Q&A form into the chat box, so as you listen along, please use the form to submit your questions. It is now my honor to introduce tonight's moderator, Ru Freeman, and to thank her for the crucial role she played in organizing this event. Ru.
Thanks, Oppie. It's really great to be here, and I'm going to begin with an anecdote. When my father heard that I was going to do this event, he sent me a series of emails in quick succession mentioning a number of texts. The Mahabharata and the Ramayana are the 2 major Sanskrit epics of ancient India, shorter texts embedded in Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe's play Tamburlaine the Great, Walter de la Mare's Napoleon, that last he referred to as a footnote to War and Peace, and an aside about the actor Sergei Bondarchuk. Wilfred Owen, Yeats, especially the poems Easter 1916 and On Being Asked for a War Poem, Auden's Elegy for Yeats, Brecht, Neruda, and also Joe Hill, Woody Guthrie, Bob Dylan, and Taha Muhammad Ali. Also rap. My father is going to be 85 soon. He's a retired civil servant and a poet. He's a terrific example of the global tradition of poets and writers being at the forefront of global conversations and actively engaged in border crossing, though this is a more rare practice among American wordsmiths, not the case with our poets here. Robert Bly once said that the poet's main job is to penetrate that husk around the American psyche. And since that psyche is inside him too, them too, the writing of political poetry is like the writing of personal poetry, a sudden drive by the poet inward. I would argue that UMass has assembled the poets' poets here this evening, people whose personal lives epitomize that quintessential dichotomy that Bly is referring to be both the savior of the jailed as well as being themselves imprisoned. Their full bios are available online, and if I were to read them out, it would take up the brief 90 minutes we have in their company, so I will just say a few things and leave you to the joy of discovering more on your own. Carolyn Forché is described by Claudia Rankine as combining the attentive sensibility of a master poet with the unflinching eyes of a human rights activist. She's no stranger to the work of public record, sometimes the only available one. Apart from her own books of poetry and nonfiction, she has edited anthologies that do the insistent work of memory keeping, the latest being In the Hour of War, Poems from Ukraine, co-edited with Ilya Kaminsky. In an introduction they wrote together is this fragment. While language is never commensurate with such horrors, it can and does embed a mosaic chip of evidence in the grout of forgetfulness and challenges attempts to obliterate the truth of history. Arguably one of the best definitions I've ever read of what poetry can do with its narrative precision. Monique Adel-Callahan speaks of Yusef Komunyakaa's work as one that aims to illustrate contemporary transformations in our understanding of the relationship between literature, language, and citizenship as both a local and global phenomenon within the context of a growing transnational ethos. Though I don't think it's growing, I think it has always existed, and some Americans like Yusef never thought otherwise. Marta Wabnowska writes that as a citizen of the world, Komunyaka's poetic subject is concerned with the cross-currents of global cultural exchange, the continued prevalence of totalitarian and militarized power structures around the globe, as well as with the role of cultural and historical memory in the forging of a community that is both transnational and rooted. Dunya Mikhail displays a Brechtian knack for finding the unexpected angle that can illuminate a situation afresh, writes Paul Batchelor for Carteret. Speaking of poetry, Dunya, during an NPR interview recently, explained her approach to poetry this way. She said, "Poetry is not medicine. It's an X-ray. It helps you see the wound and understand it." That X-ray vision is described by Ru Freeman thus: Mikhail sings of the longing and undoing of exile, mourns the loss of her language, describes its gendering and the re-engineering on her tongue, a poet's most important muscle. Her work, he goes on to write, is delicate, beautiful, day-stopping. Michiko Kakutani describes Ocean Vuong's work as containing a tensile precision, reminiscent of Emily Dickinson's work, combined with a Gerard Manley Hopkins-like appreciation for the sound and rhythm of words. He himself has spoken of his life this way: "My life and my mother's life wouldn't have happened without the war. But despite all this, two people loved each other. And the big lesson for me as an artist is that life is always more complicated than the headlines allow. Poetry comes in when the news is not enough." You can now applaud them in Zoom or loudly in your own private spaces. I'm going to introduce each set of poems very briefly, and then the poets will just offer up their wonderful work. The first set of poems introduces us to America's presence in Vietnam, Syria, and Iraq, either through the lens of carrying out an American agenda in those places, while also carrying its wounds upon the self, or through the aftermath in the lives of those who have been forced out of those countries to, as Carolyn Forché once said, live without having survived. I'm going to hand it over to Dunya, first reader.
Thank you, Ru. I read "I Was in a Hurry." It's translated by Elizabeth Winslow. Yesterday, I lost the country. I was in a hurry and didn't notice when it fell from me like a broken branch from a forgetful tree. Please, if anyone passes by and stumbles across it, perhaps in a suitcase open to the sky, or engraved on a rock like a gaping wound, or wrapped in the blankets of immigrants, or canceled like a losing lottery ticket, or helplessly forgotten in purgatory, or rushing forward without a goal like the questions of children's, or rising with the smoke of war, or rolling in a helmet on the sand, or stolen in Alibaba's jar, or disguised in the uniform of a policeman who stirred up the prisoners and fled, or squatting in the mind of a woman who tries to smile, or scattered like the dreams of new immigrants in America. If anyone stumbles across it, return it to me, please. Please return it. It's my country. I was in a hurry when I lost it yesterday.
I'm going to read a poem that was given to me in the voice of in the story of a Syrian refugee whom I met in winter in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The boatman. We were 31 souls, he said, on the gray sick of sea, in a cold rubber boat, rising and falling in our filth. By morning, this didn't matter. No land was in sight. All were soaked to the bone, living and dead. We could still float, we said, from war to war. What lay behind us but ruins of stone, piled on ruins of stone? City called Mother of the Poor, surrounded by fields of cotton and millet. City of jewelers and cloak makers with the oldest church in Christendom and the sword of Allah. If anyone remains there now, they would be utterly alone. There is a hotel named for it in Rome, 200 meters from the Piazza di Spagna, where you can have breakfast under the portraits of film stars. There, the staff cannot do enough for you. But I am talking nonsense again, as I have since that night. We fetched a child, not ours, from the sea, drifting face down in a life vest. Its eyes taken by fish or the birds above us. After that, Aleppo went up in smoke. And Raqqa came under a rain of leaflets warning everyone to go. Leave, yes, but go where? We lived through the Americans and Russians, through Americans again, many nights of death from the clouds, mornings surprised to be waking from the sleep of death, still unburied and alive, with no safe place. Leave, yes, we'll obey the leaflets, but go where? To the sea to be eaten? To the shores of Europe to be caged? To Camp Misery and Camp Remain here? I ask you then, where? You tell me you are a poet. If so, our destination is the same. I find myself now the boatman, driving a taxi at the end of the world. I will see that you arrive safely, my friend. I will get you there.
Kudo Street. Music divides the even. I close my eyes and can see men drawing lines in the dust. America pushes through the membrane of mist and smoke. And I'm a small boy again in Bogalusa, Wayne only signs in Hank snow. But tonight, I walk into a place where bar girls fade like tropical birds. When I order a beer, the mama-san behind the counter acts as if she can't understand, while her eyes skirt each white face as Hank Williams calls from the psychedelic jukebox. We have played Judas Swear. Only machine gun fire brings us together. Down the street, black GIs hold to their turf also. and off-limit signs pulls me deeper into alleys as I look for a softness behind these voices, wounded by their beauty and war. Back in the bush at Dak To and Khe Sanh, we fought the brothers of these women we now run to hold in our arms. There's more than a nation inside us as Black and white soldiers touch the same levers minutes apart, tasting each other's breath. Without knowing, these rooms run into each other like tunnels leading to the underworld.
This poem is titled "A Little Closer to the Edge." Young enough to believe nothing will change them. They step hand in hand into the bomb crater. The night full of black teeth. His faux Rolex, weeks from shattering against her cheek, now dims like a miniature moon behind her hair. In this version, the snake is headless, stilled like a cord unraveled from the lover's ankles. He lifts her white cotton skirt, revealing another hour. His hands, the syllables inside them. O Father, O foreshadow, press into her as the field shreds itself with cricket cries. Show me how ruin makes a home out of hip bones. O Mother, O minute hand, teach me how to hold a man the way thirst holds water. Let every river envy our mouths. Let every kiss hit the body like a season, where apples thunder the earth with red hooves. And I am your son.
How her husband went. Not the war, but the orchards. Not flight from aerial bombardment, but lunches under linden trees with fig jam, cheese, and oysters still alive. Ilya said that the war was right in this room. I still have the quilt made from swatches of clothing sewn for wealthy women, lace soaked in tea, the dark velvet where sleep the stars of winter. I keep it in a box with the library scarf, as she called it, and some books saved from a fire by the husband she found dead with his eyes open. Also her tailor's chalk and straight pins stuck in a cushion. You make do, she said. It never ceases to amaze what the rich throw away. Shoes still with soles, clothes no moths have eaten. I know what you think. I have lost my mind. We have all done, hurrying in and out. Every generation calls their war the war. But every war is as different as it is the same, do you not think? Today we had herring and cream for breakfast, but I wanted a thin slice of the smoked reindeer heart he brought from Helsingborg. They wouldn't give me that, so all day I pretended to be as far away as I could. In the quilt, there is a square of silk from the dress she made for a countess, the color of the sky before rain, and the lace dyed in tea. When her husband's heart stopped, he was chopping wood for winter. He fell into the snow, and the snow was still falling into his eyes when she found him.
Love in the time of a war. His name is called a son's lost voice hovers near a fishing hole in August. His name is called a lover's hand disturbs a breath of summer cloth. His name is called a third time, but his propped up boots and helmet refuse to answer. The photo remains silent, and his name hangs in the high rafters. She tenderly hugs the pillar, whispering his name. The dog rises beside the bedroom door and wanders with its head caught, listening for a name in a dead language.
This poem is called Dear Sarah. There's an epigraph from my cousin Sarah, who was 7 years old at the time. I was trying to get her to work on her writing, and she stumped me with this rebuttal. What's the point of writing if you're just going to force a bunch of ants to cross a white desert? And this is my response. Typical to myself, it came years later. Dear Sarah, and if you follow these ants, they'll lead you back to stone tablets. In older desert, where black bones once buried are now words, where I wave to you at 2:34 a.m. They survived the blast by becoming shrapnel embedded in my brain, which is called reading. But maybe I shouldn't talk like this. I should start over, Sarah. I messed up. I'm trying to stay clean, but my hands are monsters who believe in magic. Sarah, the throat is also an inkwell. Black oil wrung through your father's fingers after a day beneath the Buick. Say heartbreak and nothing will shatter. Say Stonehenge and watch the elephants sleep like boulders blurred in Serengeti rain. It doesn't have to make sense to be real. Your Aunt Rose, gone 2 years now, like a trick they forgot to finish. And the air holds your voice as it holds its own vanishing. Maybe you are the true soldier ant, hoarder of what's so massive it could crush you into a twitching comma. Sarah, your name sharpens daily against the marble of your mother's teeth. There are sparks in every calling, and called, we press our faces to the womb till we're jokes on our way to cracking up. And maybe you're right, little ant queen. With your shoes, the shade of dirty paper, white desert, your pink and blue pens, untouched. After all, who can stare at so many ruins and call it learning? This family of ants fossilized on the page. You slam the book shut, look out at the leafless trees doused in red April rain, where none of us are children long enough to love it.
My poem will not save you. Remember the toddler lying face down on the sand and the wave gently receding from his body as if a forgotten dream. My poem will not turn him into his back and lift him up to his feet so he can run into a familiar lap like before. I'm sorry, my poem will not block the shells when they fall into a sleeping town, will not stop the buildings from collapsing around their residents, will not pick up the broken leg flower from under the shrapnel, will not raise the dead. My poem will not defuse the bomb in the public square. It will soon explode when the girl insists that her father buy her gum. My poem will not rush them to leave the place and ride the car that will just miss the explosion. Many mistakes in life will not be corrected by my poem. Questions will not be answered. I'm sorry, my poem will not save you. My poem cannot return all of your losses, not even some of them. And those who went far away, my poem won't know how to bring them back to their lovers. I'm sorry, I don't know why the birds sing during their crossings over our ruins. Their songs will not save us, although in the chilliest times, they keep us warm. And when we need to touch the soul to know it's not dead, their songs give us that touch.
There was a graphic going around social media recently that said, when America decided that killing children was okay, the gun battle was lost. Of course, the creator of the graphic was only referring to the horror of being okay with killing our own children, since, of course, America, i.e. Americans, have been sanguine with directly or indirectly killing other people's children from Chile to Palestine, from Somalia to Afghanistan for a long time. Empire can only be sustained through a robust acquiescence by the citizenry to an ethic of imperialism, which is necessarily violent. Here are our poets on how that ethic is codified in our seemingly harmless language and play, and how not. Yusef will start us off with his poem.
Love in a time of war, tribe, clan, valley, and riverbank, country, continent, interstellar, aborigines, squad, platoon, company, battalion, regiment, hive, and swarm, colony, legend, laws, ordinances, statutes, grid coordinates, maps, longitude, latitude, property lines drawn in unconsecrated dust, suction and compass, leisure, loyalty, oath, therefore, here and before, expedite car, lock and load, bullseye, Megas drawers, little boy, fat man, circle in the eye, baronet, skull and bone, them, body count, thou and I, us, honey, darling, sweetheart, was I talking, war in my sleep again? Come closer. Yes. Place your head against my chest, the moon on the windowsill. I want to stitch up all your wounds with kisses, but I also know that sometimes the seed is hurting for red in the soil. Sometimes I hold you like Achilles' shell, your mouth on mine, my trembling inside your heart and sex. Boys in a field, using the gun mounts for monkey bars, children skinned a cat, pulling themselves through, suspended in doorways of abandoned helicopters in graveyards. With arms spread eagle, they imitate vultures landing in fields. Their play is silent as distant rain, the volume turned down on the 6 o'clock news, except for the boy with American eyes who keeps singing rat-a-tat-tat, hugging a broken machine gun.
Poem is a sonnet made from found language called Old Glory. Knock 'em dead, big guy. Go in there, guns blazing, buddy. You crushed at the show. No, it was a blowout. No, a massacre. Total overkill. We tore them a new one. My son's a beast, a lady killer, straight shooter. He knocked her up, a bombshell blonde. You'll blow them away. Let's bag the broad. Let's spit roast the faggot. Let's fuck his brains out. That girl's a grenade. It was like Nam down there. I still slam it though. I'd smash it good. I'm cracking up. It's hilarious. You truly murdered. You had me dying over here, bro. For real though. I'm dead.
In a word, when my students misspell Arabic, they discover how letters can change fates. Amal, hope, can make an anagram of alam, pain, an exercise I would hesitate to dissuade. And shafa, healing, will mean some shaqa, suffering. I can't spare them, but when they learn bahr, letting them express a desire to go to sea, I ensure they don't spell harb, because they end up in a war they never intended. Even a kiss, qubla, could explode if they wrote qumbula, bomb. But I can't keep their best teacher, life, from giving them all the lessons they need.
Harmalapi is a word that means a sadness that is beautiful. Harmalapi, it begins with a word as small as the cry of Athena's owl, an ache in the cage of breath, as when we say, can hardly breathe. In sleep, we see our name on a stone, for instance, or while walking in the rain among graves, we feel watched. Others are still come into our lives. They come, there is a light sound of wings brushing the walls, or two other words, but they are the same passerines as live in the stone eaves, as forage in the air toward night. To see them, one must not be looking.
Dunya Mikhail describes war as a lose-lose situation, where the one who is killed dies physically, the killer dies morally, leaving both essentially dead. Despite that fact, war has become a constant, a refrain, happening then in Baghdad, happening now in Odessa, repetitive and requiring a poetic accounting, as well as a reconstruction of cities, of relatives, a consecration on the page. We begin with Dunya.
The war works hard. How magnificent the war is, how eager and efficient. Early in the morning, it wakes up the sirens and dispatches ambulances to various places, swings corpses through the air, rolls stretchers to the wounded, summons rain from the eyes of mothers, digs into the earth, dislodging many things from under the ruins. Some are lifeless and glistening, others are pale and still throbbing. It produced the most questions in the minds of children, entertains the gods by shooting fireworks and missiles into the sky, sows mines in the fields, and reaps punctures and blisters, urges families to immigrate, stands beside the clergymen as they curse the devil. Poor devil, he remains with one hand in the searing fire. The war continues working day and night. It inspires tyrants to deliver long speeches, awards medals to generals, and themes to poets. It contributes to the industry of artificial limbs, provides food for flies, adds pages to the history books, achieves equality between killer and killed, teaches lovers to write letters, accustoms young women to waiting, fills the newspapers with articles and pictures, builds new houses for the orphans, invigorates the coffin makers, gives the grave diggers a pat on the back, and paints a smile on the leader's face. It works with unparalleled diligence, yet no one gives it a word of praise.
Autobiography of my alter ego. Iraq. Well, as I said before, if you start me talking, I'll tell everything I know. And now I'll say this. Please, America, let's forget the old warfare of skin color and hair. I can see a gutted palace and way, dust devils rising from the ashes of Operation Phoenix, gods fighting other gods, the looting and pillage of museums in Baghdad, the shattering of a porcelain peg with a ball-peen hammer, looters running with engraved images and figures, statues, icons, and cuneiforms stained with the blood and sweat of war. Some are messengers of the dead, trying to hide treasures from the infidels, as if we're the last horde of barbarians storming the gates. Others, of course, are filling orders for this blue jug of Sumerian clay, shaped and fired on banks of the Euphrates. The shadow or the stature lying like a dead child in a heap of rubble, the shadow of a desert ram burned into it.
Poem is titled Telemachus. Like any good son, I pull my father out of the water, drag him by his hair through white sand, his knuckles carving a trail the waves rush in to erase. because the city beyond the shore is no longer where we left it, because the bombed cathedral is now a cathedral of trees. I kneel beside him to see how far I might sink. Do you know who I am, Ba? But the answer never comes. The answer is the bullet hole in his back, brimming with seawater. He is so still, I think he could be anyone's father. Found the way a green bottle might appear at a boy's feet, containing a year he has never touched. I touch his ears. No use. I turn him over to face it. The cathedral in his sea black eyes. The face not mine, but one I will wear to kiss all my lovers goodnight. The way I seal my father's lips with my own and begin the faithful work of breathing.
Exile for Ilya Kaminsky. The city of your childhood rises between steppe and sea, wheat and light, white with the dust of cockle shells, stargazers, and bones of pipefish. City of limestone, soft enough to cut with a hatchet, where the sea unfurls and acacias brought by Greeks on their ships turn white in summer. So yes, you remember, this is the city you lost. City of smugglers and violinists, chess players and monkeys, an opera house, a madhouse, a ghost church with wind for its choir, where two things were esteemed, literature and ships, poetry and the sea. If you return now, it will not be as a being visible to others. And when you walk past, it will not be as if a man had passed, but rather as if someone had remembered something long forgotten and wondered why. If you return, your father will be alive to prepare for you his mint cucumber soup or give you the little sweet called bird's milk. And after hours of looking with him for his sandals lost near the sea, you visit again together the amusement park where your ancestors are buried, and then go home to the apartment house built by German prisoners of war, to whom your father gave bread, which you remember surprised you. You take the tram to a stop where it is no longer possible to get off, and he walks with you until he vanishes, still holding in his own your invisible hand.
How do you protect poetry and art from empire sustained by what Matthew Desmond referred to in his essay for the 1619 project as the particular brutality of American capitalism? How indeed do each of our poets come to the page as informant, litigant, translator, friend, but most significantly as human beings who move through those experiences while preserving their humanity through their art? Let's listen to Ocean.
Poem is titled Head First. It's in the voice of a mother to her son, and it has a Vietnamese proverb as an epigraph that goes: Không có gì bằng cơm với cá, không có gì bằng má với con. Don't you know? A mother's love neglects pride. the way fire neglects the cries of what it burns. My son, even tomorrow, you will have today. Don't you know? There are men who touch breasts as they would the tops of skulls. Men who carry dreams over mountains, the dead on their backs. But only a mother can walk with the weight of a second beating heart. Stupid boy. You can get lost in every book, but you'll never forget yourself the way God forgets his hands. When they ask you where you're from, tell them your name was fleshed from the toothless mouth of a war woman, that you were not born, but crawled headfirst into the hunger of dogs. My son, tell them the body is a blade that sharpens by cutting.
Tapestry. There is no album for these, no white script on black paper, no dates stamped in the border, no sleeve, no fire. No one has written on the back from left to right. Your hair has not yet fallen out, nor grown back. Girl walking toward you out of childhood, not yet herself, having not yet learned to recite before others, and who would never wish to stand on a lighted proscenium, even in a darkened house, but would rather dig a hole in a field and cover herself with barnwood, earth, and hay, to be as quiet as plums turning. There is no calendar, no month, no locket, but your name is called and called in the early storm. No one finds you, no one ever finds you. Not in a small grave dug by a child as a hiding place, nor years later in the ship's hold, not in the shelter, nor high on the roof as the man beside you leapt, not in a basket crossing a vineyard, nor in a convent kitchen on the last night as a saint soon to be murdered told you how to live your life. Never found you walking in the ruins of the blown barracks, waiting in the flooded camp, taking cover in the machinist's shop, or lighting every votive in the Cathedral of Saint-Just with its vaulted choir and transept, a wall of suffering souls. It was just as Brecht wrote, wasn't it? You came in a time of unrest when hunger reigned. You came to the people in a time of uprising, and you rose with them. So the time passed away, which on earth was given you. Gather in your sleep the ripened plums, stay behind in the earth when your name is called.
Baghdad and Detroit. On the 4th of July, here in Detroit, I hear the echo of Baghdad explosions. They say it's the sound of fireworks. Song by song, I scatter my birds away from the fog of smoke. They say it is ordinary clouds in the sky. A butterfly from the Tigris shore alights on my hand. No bombs today to scare her away. They say this is the Detroit River. I enter a shelter with the others in the crowd. We will leave at the end of the raid. They say this is the tunnel to Canada.
envoy to Palestine. I've come to this one grassy hill, Ramada, off Tokyo Street, to place a few red anemones and a sheaf of wheat on Darwish's grave. A borrowed line transported me beneath a Babylonian moon, and I found myself lucky to have the shadow of a coat as warm. Listening to a poet's song of Jerusalem, the hum of a red string Caesar stole off Gilgamesh's lute. I know a prison of sunlight on the skin. The land I come from, they also dreamt before they arrived in towering ships, battered by the hard Atlantic winds. Crows followed me from my home. My coyote heart is an old renegade redskin, a noble savage, still Lakota. And I knew the bow before the arch. I feel around the wildflowers, all the grasses and insects singing to me. My sacred dead is the dust of restless plains I come from. I love when it gets into my eyes and mouth, telling me of the roads behind and ahead. I go back to broken treaties and smallpox, the irony of barbed wire. Your envoy could be reprobate, whose inheritance is no more than a swig of firewater. The sun made a temple of the bones of my tribe. I know a dried up riverbed and extinct animals live in your nightmares, sharp as shark teeth from my mountains, strung into this brave necklace around my neck. I hear Chief Standing Bear saying to Judge Dundee, I am a man, and now I know why. I'd rather die a poet than a warrior, tattoo, and tomahawk.
Well, that concludes the main part of our reading. We'll also do they'll be reading again at the very end. I just want to remind everybody that there is an address, it's in chat for you to send questions to us, and our guests will be happy to answer them. I want to ask you all a question. I've always been curious about how someone translates the experience of belonging to a pre-existing set of conditions in America. And possibly carry deep opposition to those conditions, but then also becomes the face of that same America, full of its violence in another country simply by virtue or vice of being American, whether you were born into that citizenship or acquired it in later years. And I'd ask all of you to just unmute and interrupt one another like we are sitting around a dining table. Anyone can go.
These are difficult questions, Ru, important questions. I don't know what it's like to be otherwise, because from a very early age, I was young when the civil rights movement happened, and then the Vietnam War and the American War in Vietnam, and I don't I've always found myself to be in a position of a dissident. And so I don't know what it's like, to be other than in a position inside the US. And gratefully, when I'm outside the US, people tend to forgive me for being American. They tend to be very understanding of the dilemma, and also I don't feel that I'm a representative. I feel like I'm there to listen and to take back whatever I can. I think all of us are bridge people, standing between cultures. Once you cross over, you never can come back. You come back, but you're not the person who left. So we're always hovering between worlds,
And translation, I guess, is part of that. I mean, it's always an act of translation, and you and Dunya, I think both of you have done work in that regard.
everything is translation. Yeah.
Yeah. So Carolyn, you're saying how to carry across, and this moving from not only a place to a place, but from language to another. We carry ourselves across the borders, and sometimes we smuggle our own stuff, our foreignness, if you will, to the second language. I mean, as much as I'm concerned, I don't know for you if you feel that way. Yeah. So, but in addition to that, it's true that it's been since I was in Iraq, since I was a child, poetry was essential for me. But when I came here to America, it became even became more essential, because it was only through poetry I became a citizen. I felt I had the sense of being a citizen, and that as if others, the readers, they immigrate to our words, and they add their own meanings, and familiar or unfamiliar, that how they associate with it. But I feel like a citizen who welcomes these newcomers, and as I welcomed by others before me.
I feel that just living is an act of becoming. So consequently, we are changing each and every day. We are embracing mysteries. We are embracing ironclad ideas about ourselves, when in fact, we are also subverting those ideas at the same time. Just by the fact, especially as writers, we are embracing extended possibilities. So it's a growth process. I'd like to be able to say, to laugh about a phrase and say, where did that come from? Being surprised. I think that's necessary. That it's not ironclad, structured, and we have to be able to embrace those surprises when they come to us. So breathing, chanting, all of those things that vibrate inside of us.
That kind of leads into one of the questions from the audience, Sophia, who asks, how do you keep peace in your heart as poets? Where do you go? And this is particularly for Ocean and also Carolyn, but anyone can answer. When you write through witness, does it threaten to harden your heart and your spirit? How do you deal with that?
Oh, I'll let you know when I find out. I think a part of me also wants to resist the poet's vocation as a problem solver. And I think in our culture, particularly in capitalism, we want to go to the reading, the panel, or the book to get something, some kind of resolution out of it. And so we turn the artist into a specialist, right? We love specialists in this country. You go to one doctor, and after a while, you're seeing dozens of specialists. And I think this works in art too. And so I think it's actually really helpful to center a sort of bewilderment as part of the process, that doubt and fatigue is also a kind of energy, you know, ironically as that sounds. And I think it's important for us to even say, I don't come to terms. How can I come to terms with geopolitical rifts that has been started long before even my grandparents' time? And so but we come to art to say, you must be the expert. Now relieve me of my bewilderment of it. But I think let's all lean into that bewilderment, because there's a fine line between terror and awe, and how that transforms to wonder. And I think that's between the line between terror and awe is kind of where I'm most interested in mediating as an artist. And there's a lot to say about nations and translations and bridge building and crossing. And I think that's one of art's major functions. But I'm also interested in kind of recalibrating the bridge itself as a destination. You know, that's where poetry and estrangement means so much to me. It's like I go to poetry the way I go to a bridge to say that this is also a place one can stay for a while, that we don't just, you know, use it as a utilitarian space, that the liminal space, the spaces that cannot be nationed, is also a space of power. And I think I go to the lyric poem because of its elisions, the way it dodges rationale, its surrealist possibilities. And I think that idea of turning the question into a destination, so that the question does not have to be solved, but that it can embrace you and hold you, is where so much of the good work comes from.
I don't believe that we get over things, and I don't believe that we live after they happen. We live in the aftermath. We are always walking in the aftermath of what happened. So, and with poetry, my experience is that you write what you must. It surprises you. It comes out of you. You don't try to decide something. You don't pick some subject. So I experience writing as a flowing out, as a release, maybe, as a release of something that wants to be in the world. And I don't, I think that my goal is really awareness, you know, rather than peace in my heart. I don't know what a peaceful heart would be like, but maybe when I get even older than I am now, I will know what it's like. But for me, it's awareness, clarity, being able to be with the world and as it is, and recognize it as it is, and not falsely. And that's all. Poetry is something that has a life and a mind of its own.
Yes, one would hope that a peaceful heart is not a lone sleep. What I mean by that is that we are reckoning with some of the things that we observe, some of the things that happen directly to us. I just think that, again, we're back to the word becoming, that it is natural for us to grow into what we must face.
Yeah, and it can be distracting from the catastrophe. The writing can be distracting, that it takes us to the art, to the aesthetic event rather than the catastrophic one. And it becomes itself the experience, in addition to that experience writing about them. Writing itself becomes that experience.
Dunya, Talat has a question for you about whether the experience of braiding Arabic and English in your poems is a sort of, it's a form of resistance or breaking the rules of English or subverting US colonial hegemony, or are you doing it as a way of maintaining your own identity and agency and visibility as an Arab American poet?
Actually, it's just that I think I can't think still, but in Arabic that I can think. So first, when I first go right to left, then when I try to when I go by left to right by myself, when I translate my own writing, I find it very useful even to my original writing in Arabic. It opens my eyes to my work in the original language. It opens my eyes to the flaws, the weaknesses in the piece that translation makes me, understand what I'm trying to do in the poem more. So I find it useful, and I let the two languages kind of as if they converse with each other in a way that true lovers do, that they don't impose themselves too much on each other, but they grow together in the page. So I like it this way.
Well, I mean, both of you, as I mentioned earlier, you and Carolyn have done, have translated and anthologized the work of others, which I think of as sort of building a communality, confronting anything I feel is both a personal and a communal cause. And constructing communality is therefore one of the fundamental necessities. If you're thinking about the theme of this event, Confronting Empire, how do each of you view your personal commitment to that act of building communality within the work or outside it, with each other, or different ways that you do it?
I find translation to be really a beautiful experience because you enter the sensibility of another. Otherwise, you won't translate their work very well. And so you get to be someone else for a little while, and you get to try to make their poem in another language, which is impossible, but then you try. And if you get a poem that is good in English and it corresponds to the poem that you were given in the source language, then something magical has happened. I really believe in amplifying the voices of others. And I think particularly US Americans need to hear the voices of the rest of the world, which is why I translate people from other countries and anthologize from other countries, because really very little of the contemporary literature of the rest of the world is translated into English. Very little, 3%. So I try to contribute to grow that so that Americans won't be as profoundly isolated as they are, and so that they maybe understand, maybe have a way of seeing the rest of the world as and themselves as part of a larger world, and not somehow in control of the world.
And I guess Lina Munzer has a beautiful essay called War in Translation. It's prose, which is talking about embodying the horrors and violences perpetrated against women in particular. And in her case, she's talking about the act of translation allowing you to also carry the burden of what has been suffered by other people. So it's not theirs alone, but also yours. It's not just kind of a distant understanding, but a carrying, which is kind of what you're talking about, bringing to the American consciousness, I think.
I tend to translate also living poets so that I can talk to them, work with them, show them what I have, ask them what they, how they feel about it, and listen to them reading in their own language so I can hear the music and the rhythm, without meaning. So yeah, I think it's really, I really advocate, if you can do it, if you have more than one language, I really urge you to translate, because What it also does for me is it makes me into a different poet when I come through it. When I've finished it, I'm someone else too, a little bit.
Mhm. But you don't have to or necessarily speak a different language in order to do it, to do the work of translation. I'm thinking about John Hennessy, who's doing the background work for us today, who's also translating from Ukraine, the Ukrainian poets, and doesn't really speak the language, but so has to work in collaboration.
We're
with some-
working in a team then, yes. And it's a communal act.
Yeah.
And some people frown on this, but I've really had a wonderful experience translating Mahmoud Darwish with a group of 3 Arabic poets and Arabic speakers. And it was, we spent a whole summer arguing, and it was magnificent.
Yeah. So I'm shifting direction slightly because I'm thinking about Li Young Lee says that the real subject in poetry is silence, that it's like in architecture where the medium is not really stone or metal, but space. And Ocean, you also said that a poet in the Greek sense of the word, as a maker, is a maker of space. What do you think, how do you think of that space? Is it one expecting occupancy, or is it one creating refuge for the creator? How do you see it?
Well, I perhaps have a more Buddhist approach to it, where space is in conjunction with emptiness. And emptiness is often misunderstood as a nihilistic idea of nothingness, but it's in fact the idea of the absolute reverse, which is infinite possibility. And so I think there's an anxiety writing a poem, as soon as you put one word down, the possibilities narrow, and the poem starts to create a sort of hierarchy of choices. And there's a lot of delight and a lot of fretfulness in that endeavor. But I do think that silence and space, and also, you know, what Keats calls the negative capability, what a word connotes, the lies and the resonances, the ripples, or you might even call the ghosts of a word through all of its etymologies comes through. There's also, I do believe, and I don't mean to be too woo-woo about it, the idea of energy. I mean, I could read a poem by Basho in 17th century Japan and absolutely feel the melancholic solitude of that energy transferred instantaneously via the text to me in the 21st century. And so I think that idea of space conflated with silence and also energy, which we cannot see but feel, doesn't truly die. And I think it might be difficult in the Western social hierarchies to see emptiness and space and silence as powerful. We often say that silence is death, publish or perish. And so there's this, this sort of race to speak and to fill the void. But I think the older I get, the more I work, the more I feel like my work is about listening. What am I hearing? What's coming through all the static? We can say this similar to sort of an archaeology of sound, right? In archaeophonics, as my friend Peter Gizzi would call it. We are digging up the sonics, and like archaeologists, you keep brushing away, and one lucky morning, or with me at 2 in the morning at night, a flash of white bone surfaces from the dirt, and you say, there it is. I don't know what it is, but I'll keep digging until it reveals itself.
There's a question, Dean asks the whole panel, and I'm going to read this question out because you will probably make more sense of it than I can. The individual, the personal possession, the family, opened up to country, the country at war, the war. You'll have the remarkable ability to use the surprise phrase that Yusef spoke about to reduce the universal from the personal, the macro from the micro. Does this ability find itself as you write to educe the universal from the personal, the macro from the micro? Does this ability find itself as you write? And you sort of answered it, Ocean, in the image that you just gave us of the little bone that, you know, you don't know what you found, you find it. But anybody else with a response to that? It's a question for the whole panel.
The language in poetry is compressed, it's under compression. And when you're writing, if you are truly inside the poem, as Ocean said, listening to the poem and then letting it come, and sometimes if you're really lucky, an image comes, and that image is what Pound called a vortex. It's a node of meaning that has the whole poem encapsulated inside it. It kind of explodes inside the poem and radiates out. And so I think what the person is hearing are those images that are in the poem that connect something deep and perhaps what we would call in our personal, but it's that it connects on all levels at once. It's all of the lenses of the psyche have lined up. The subconscious, the unconscious, the dream consciousness, everything lines up, and this one image comes out, and it holds all the rest of it. And if you get one of those in a poem, you know, then that is the crystal, that's the poem crystallized inside one image. I don't know, that probably doesn't make any sense. I'm sure it doesn't, but that's my feeling. They're always a gift. Those lines that you're hearing that connect that macro to the micro are pure gift. You cannot think them up. It doesn't come from the intellect.
But also, I think time has something to do with all of that, because I don't think it happens just off the cuff. There's a kind of living with, enduring, and coming out on the other side and laughing, saying, oh, that's what it means.
Yeah.
So this kind of speaks to that a little bit. Van asks the whole panel, do you feel like you finished when you put the poems out into the world with that particular poem?
There's no finished, I don't believe there is a finished poem. It's always a work in progress. I mean, I have very strict feeling or measurement sometimes when I mean, that's not, I know it's not nice of me. I say to students when they ask, how do we know it's finished, is a complete poem? I say, I know it's very strict advice, but I say, well, imagine this is your only poem. You'll never write anything after it, and this is the only poem you presented to the world. Are you satisfied? If not, then work on it. So, but there's no, it's hard to have really a complete poem. That's why we come back to them, and there's always a possibility of doing something with it. And that's one of the reasons like that, I felt it was not fair to translators. Like I keep changing, make changes, and then when they thought it's done, but for me, it's never done.
They're usually abandoned, as they say. Poems are, I think what we do is we release them, you know, with some trepidation, but we always think there's something more we could do. Yeah.
I tend to read from my ARCs at all times, because then I can continue to correct as I'm doing the public reading, because then, you know, I have some, it feels like it's still my book. I can still do something with it. The printed things are just someone else's possession. Do you think you can combine art and politics in your poems without destroying the mystery of the art, and without diluting the depth of the political? It's a question from Doug.
I don't find these things easily separable.
Right.
It's hard for me to talk and speak in categories like that. So I think I don't, they're all connected. Everything is all interwoven all the time. And you can separate a strand and talk about it, but everything is embedded in everything else. And it's all in a web. It's all connected. You touch one part of the web and the whole web radiates, so trembles. So I don't think we can, I mean, there's a lot of intellectual things we could say about that issue and about whether the poet has designs on us and whether the, you know, the politics are overly, whether we foregrounded that or operated out of intentionality too strongly. You could say all of that, but really the answer is that they're all connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think all four of you can really embody the idea that your art and your lives aren't separate. So you're living in, you are also works of art in how you conduct life and how you engage with people and word and each other and poetry as well. So having said that, I want to be sure that I leave time for the four of you to give us all one last poem before, and we're going to, that's how we're going to end this wonderful program. And thank you for being here and sharing all of your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think I'm going to hand it off now to Dunya, who's going to begin the close.
Black and white. In chess, white plays first and black responds. When a challenge happens, killing offers the easiest solution. The two players alternate, tossing wooden bodies into the box. The pawns are the first to go. A tie ends it. Everybody died except the black king and the white king, separated by a borderline and the memory of ruined castles. The two kings are afraid of losing one another. The problem is how to meet without a checkmate. Love offers the hardest solution. The rules of the game dictate that sharing a square equals death for one, and keeping their distance means death for them both. To leave the board for a life the color of water, a play no less risky than running after a bubble. You lose it once you touch it.
The bull. He stood alone in the backyard, so dark the night purpled around him. I had no choice. I opened the door and stepped out, wind in the branches. He watched me with kerosene blue eyes. What do you want? I asked, forgetting I had no language. He kept breathing to stay alive. I was a boy, which meant I was a murderer of my childhood. And like all murderers, my God was stillness. My God, he was still there, like something prayed for by a man with no mouth. The green-blue lamp swirled in its socket. I didn't want him. I didn't want him to be beautiful, but needing beauty to be more than hurt, gentle enough to want. I reached for him. I reached, not the bowl, but the depths, not an answer, but an entrance, the shape of an animal, like me.
I want to thank my fellow poets. I love you and I love your work, and this has been extraordinary. This next poem was written for a Zoom that I knew I was going to be on with poets in Ukraine after the invasion. And I wanted to send a message, so this was written very quickly to be that. If there is ink for this hour, if there is something to say, to write that would send the tanks, the convoys and transports into reverse on the roads they have rutted, send them back to the borders they crossed, send them back, and the hours too that have passed since dawn on the 24th day of the second month, send those hours with them, and the enemy soldiers dragging with them their crematorium and the corpses of their fellow soldiers they have left behind, and their own wounded, send them back. If there is ink, if there is something to write that would raise the cities from the ruins, the apartment blocks, hospitals, schools, that would put the cities back as they were, I would give everything to fill my pen with it.
Rock me, mercy. The river stones are listening because we have something to say. The trees lean closer today. The singing in the electrical woods has gone down. It looks like rain because it is too warm to snow. Guardian angels, wherever you're hiding, we know you can't be everywhere at once. Have you corralled all the pretty wild horses? The memory of ants asleep and daylilies, roses, holly, and larkspur. The magpies gaze at us, still waiting. River stones are listening, but all we can say now is, mercy, please rock me.